welcome everybody to this afternoon. I was about to say tonight because I'm so used to Wednesday nights, but to this afternoon's almost live virtual programming. It's the historic Roedde House, which we'll get into the nitty gritty of what that looks like in just a minute when I welcome our special guest. But before I do that, I want to just acknowledge, as always, that you're receiving this VocalEye programming, and it's being broadcasted to you from the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. It's an honor to work, live, and play on this land, and to acknowledge that it was taken care of in the most kindest of ways before we arrive, and we should continue on to support and acknowledge the land. So thank you for that. I also want to just acknowledge those of you who have had the opportunity to make a contribution, because VocalEye offers this programming free of charge to our members and to anybody who wants to join. But I do want to just acknowledge and to thank those who have made donations, and to offer the opportunity for those who feel like they are in a position to make a donation. Donna's going to post a link in the chat that will take you to our website. And of course, the website's up 24 hours a day. So, if you wake up 3 days from now at 2 in the morning and you feel like you want to make a donation, you know where to find the link, vocaleye.ca. And of course, as is recognized by the many guests we have on our show, with us this afternoon, anybody is welcome to join us for these events. It's so great to have accessible art for people who are blind and partially sighted, but you don't have to be blind or partially sighted to join us. We simply ask that you register for the link at info@vocaleye.ca and let us know your name, where you're coming from, and whether you identify as sighted or non-sighted. And that's really just because, as you all know, we do these little socials, and we want to prevent Zoom bombers from dropping in, and we just want to make sure we have a safe space where everybody feels welcome. Okay, that seems like a lot of stuff to talk about, and I just want to remind everybody that after this tour today of the Roedde House, we're going to do our traditional draw. And today's a really exciting draw because Roedde House has offered a gift, a swag package, which is so generous of them. So we're going to do 2 draws tonight. For the first place draw is going to be the swag bag. So it's a Roedde House tote bag that also has the image of the Roedde House on it. There's a tea towel included and a vanilla scented candle in a ceramic, like beautiful teacup and saucer. So it's a lovely piece. There's a handmade soap from House Sound Soap Company, which is scented with Vancouver rain. I don't know how they did that, but I'm so curious about that. And then a hand sewn face mask, which, let's face it, we could all use an extra face mask. So that comes with the swag bag that comes from Roedde House, and our thanks to Roedde House for providing that. And also with that first place prize draw, we're going to include 1 ticket to the AEBC, so the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians fundraiser that's happening on November the 1st at this exact time, actually. So you'll get a ticket to that virtual event. And then the second place draw, which is no less of a prize, is a single ticket to the online fundraiser for AEBC. And of course, since this is a virtual fundraiser, it can be used by anybody across anywhere in Canada or further into the US, as we have some guests from the US with us. So that draw will be open for everybody, as opposed to our typical draw, which is open to BC residents only. Okay, that's a lot, but I know we have a special guest to welcome tonight, this afternoon. I got to stop saying tonight. Cindy Gustin is joining us. She's the volunteer docent with the Roedde Historical House. Cindy, welcome. Where are you? I know you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
There you are, Cindy. So lovely to have you joining us this afternoon. Before we share with people what this tour is all about, let's get to know Cindy just a little bit. How is it that you got involved in providing tours for the Roedde House?
So I retired 3 years ago, and my goal was for 1 year to do nothing, and then to look for some opportunities to volunteer. And one of my daughters actually had been a docent at Craigdarroch Castle in Victoria on Vancouver Island. And it sounded really interesting. And if we had lived there, I would have done that. So I looked for something perhaps similar, and found Roedde House. And in fact, I used to work at St. Paul's Hospital, which is about 4 blocks from Roedde House, but I didn't really know anything about it as well. And yeah, so that's how I sort of discovered it. What I like about it, Roedde House is the kind of place I would visit myself if I was traveling. In fact, in the Maritimes last year, we went and visited a number of house museums. And what I enjoy about it is it's a venue where the tours are very small and personalized. So really, as you go through the house, we're meeting people really from all over the world who come, and being able to share, as you said, some of Vancouver's history with them and to learn from them as well.
Awesome. I love that. So you're talking about the Roedde House being in the St. Paul's area, which is what we know as the West End, I guess, in Vancouver. If I were to take a bus from, somewhere of coming into the downtown core, where, situate us where we are close to Roedde House here. How do we get there?
Okay, so if you're coming on transit, the closest SkyTrain station would be Burrard Station.
Mm-hmm.
The closest bus stop is the number 5 on Robson Street, and there's a stop at Broughton, which is a 3-minute walk from the house. But as you probably know, Amy, the West End, I think, is very walkable. So any transit that will take you into the West End, if you're able to walk and enjoy walking, and the weather is not pouring rain. Often pre-COVID times, I would take transit myself down and would deliberately get off early and walk through the West End to the house because it's such a nice walk.
Mm-hmm.
If you're coming by car, you want to leave enough time. There is street parking, but as you probably know, the West End is a very dense, busy place. And if you can do transit, it's probably easier.
Yeah, a lot of permit only parking in that area. It's funny actually with transit, because I'll anecdotally tell you, we have a friend that lives in the West End, and she always refers to transit down there as the transit lottery.
Yeah, exactly.
Which makes me laugh a little bit. It's like you're standing waiting for the number 5, but if it comes, who knows? Or if it takes a different route, maybe. And I think that's probably because a lot of time there are these, unforeseen accidents that happen, and then you got to divert routes.
Or events, right?
Yeah.
Events.
Or events. And so she refers to it as the bus lottery, which always makes me chuckle just a little bit. For our friends who aren't familiar with the area, there's a lot of really beautiful, like old tree-lined streets. Maybe you can just sort of describe the atmosphere for us of the neighborhood.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk in more detail about it. Roedde House is situated on Barclay Heritage Square. In the West End, it's mainly high-rise apartment buildings. There are a few older single-family homes. I won't take the time up with now. The West End has developed that the way it does because of the Bartholomew Plan that the city put into place in 1927. But it's very walkable on the streets. If you're driving, it's a lot of one way for cars, and sort of partway through blocks, there'll be a little pedestrian way, but it's, very, lots of greenery growing, like trees and bushes, not a great deal of flat space.
Yeah, it is quite hilly.
Yeah,
it feels a little hilly.
It is.
And it feels, because it's got kind of I don't want to call it old, but it does have kind of an old time neighborhood vibe. And so you will come across, sorry, my friends with sight loss, when you visit, you'll come across broken sidewalks and chipped concrete and some of that kind of stuff. When I'm in the area, I try and remind myself that this is part of the ambience of, the nostalgia of the area, and think about it less from an accessibility perspective, although, so one of the things to take in consideration when you're coming to Roedde House. Okay, so we're getting close to 2:00, which is when we promised our official tour to start. I want to ask you, Cindy, how long have you actually been giving tours at Roedde House?
About 20 months, actually.
Relatively new.
Not relatively new, yeah. Actually, I'm just going to say I'm really very grateful for this opportunity because prior to COVID, to come to Roedde House, you could just walk in and go through it anytime we were open. Now, obviously, there's been some changes. We have to pre-book, and there's safety. We are reopened now, and you can tour through it. It's a little different experience, somewhat, than pre-COVID, as you would expect. And one of the changes is for our role as a docent is that we're not able to give in-person tours anymore. So I actually haven't done a tour in about 7 months, but we're dying to, I mean, like, we're just like, hey, can I tell you something about the house? Please let me give you some background as people come through. So yeah.
So if you're not giving tours right now, but the house is open, that's, I guess, a self-guided tour for any guest that's going through it?
Yeah, so the house they've got very good safety protocols in place for visiting the house right now. There's limited numbers. You pre-book tickets online, so we can limit those numbers. There's a one-way route through the house, and then there's a couple of options for the self-guided tour. Each of the rooms have printed material in it, but we also have tablets with audio tours on it.
Okay.
And on our website, there's also a podcast, and that's what they call it. But essentially, you can also listen to the audio tour on our website, through our website.
Awesome. And one of the things too, just before we start this tour, is that anybody who would like, Roedde House has a blend of tea that is, I guess, signature to Roedde House, created by Murchies, which many of you might know is a local company that carries and sells all things tea. So when our email goes out to all the guests here this afternoon, if you are interested in being mailed a tea bag that is, of course, nicely packaged, so it's not just, it's individually packaged, so it's not an unsterile tea bag, so know that it's coming to you fresh. If you would like a sample of this tea, we are going to send that out on behalf of Roedde House with our thanks, but we do need your address. So when you get that email, if you'd like some tea, just respond to it and make us aware of your address where we can send you some lovely tea. As the winter months are coming and more of us are switching from our iced tea to our hotted, heated tea. So that's a lovely offer from Roedde House. So thank you for that. All right, it's 2:00 in a few minutes. So one more thing I wanted to know from you, Cindy, before we get started officially is Roedde House is a historical place in the West End of Vancouver. Are there lots of other historical museums around that you know of in Vancouver or in the BC area?
In terms of house museums, to my knowledge, Roedde House is the only one in Vancouver. There is Irving House in New Westminster, Craig Darragh Castle on Vancouver Island, as I mentioned. Burnaby Heritage Village in Burnaby has a couple of buildings on their site that are restored houses. But yeah, we are the only one. And I actually, well, when I start the tour, I'll give a little background about how the house, in fact, became a museum, and the sort of the vision they had for doing that. I know someone you said was from Halifax. My husband and I were in the Maritimes a year ago, September, and there were some great house museums there that we went and visited. But I think, Vancouver is a younger part of the country, and we have not always been that great about preserving our heritage.
Right. There are lots of houses that are categorized as heritage homes, and so in terms of if you do renovations and things like that, you have special guidelines, but they don't always become a museum.
That's right. You're absolutely right. There's probably I don't know the number, but there's lots of homes that have heritage designations to some level, which then constrains what you can do with them. There's a number of heritage buildings. But in terms of actually a house, that you can go through and visit, as far as I know, Roedde House is the only one that's set up as a museum.
And one of the things that was really interesting when we first connected with you about Roedde House before this event, you were telling me that there are things in Roedde House that I can touch. Now, it's COVID time, so let's pretend we're in a time where we don't have to worry about the coronavirus. Yeah. For me, it's really exciting to be in a spot where I can touch stuff, where I'm welcomed to touch things. Why is this something that Roedde House decided to allow people to do? Because typically in a museum, touching is a no-no.
Okay, so I can tell you that. It was going to be a little bit about how it became a museum, but do you want me to go ahead and give you that information?
Sure, you can give us that background and then we'll go ahead and start.
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about how, as I said, how Roedde House became a museum, but the group of folks that got together and proposed it, their vision was that it would be a place where nothing was roped off and nothing was behind glass. So often when you'll go into a house museum, you'll go, and for example, as you come to, or or even in Europe, right? If you visit castles or palaces, your background reminded me of that. You'll go to a room and it'll be cordoned off, right? So you might get one step through the doorway and then you stand behind the cordon and you kind of look at what's there. And they didn't want that. They really wanted people to have a more up close, interactive, personal kind of event. So in normal times, you would be able to go into the rooms and sit on the furniture if you needed a rest. There are not all the artifacts, but a number of them that you could hold and interact with. Yeah, and that's one of the things I actually particularly like about this museum, is it really, it's such a personal experience.
Well, it certainly makes it much more accessible for several reasons. One, because I have a guided tour guide, like in you, or when I visit, in a person that will tell me all about it. And two, that I can touch things. So as a person with low sight, I love that opportunity. So my family is going to visit Roedde House when the opportunity comes up for us to do that. And I'm so excited that everybody here is going to experience Roedde House, maybe for the first time. So it's 2 o'clock. We promised to start our programming. I know as we've been talking, people have been trickling in, which is why we were waiting for 2 o'clock to round the corner before we started officially. So Cindy, I'm going to let you officially start the historic Roedde House tour.
Okay, thank you. So if they can bring up the first, there we go. Okay, sorry, for some reason, every time that happens, my screen goes small. Okay, great. So the first slide we have here is actually the front of Roedde House. We're looking at the front of Roedde House, standing on the sidewalk, it looks like. It is a square sort of building. It's a wooden house with wooden slats. It's sort of an apple green with a dark green trim. And there's a sign in the corner, on the right-hand corner of the screen, that is, it indicates that it's Roedde House Museum. One of the things I really like about volunteering at Roedde House and doing the tours is that we don't have a scripted tour or a word-for-word tour, that we can really make these tours personal and focus on the interest of our visitors. So my tour tends to be a bit fluid depending on where people are coming from and what their interests are as we go through the house. But I do like to start off a little bit about how Roedde House became a museum. So Roedde House is located on what is now called Barclay Heritage Square. That's a 2.3 acre piece of land in the west end of Vancouver, and it's bordered by Broughton Street on the east, Harrow on the north, Nicola on the west, and Barclay on the south. And in 1966, the city of Vancouver began buying properties on this site. And their original intention was to tear down all the buildings and create a park and a playing field for the West End. At that time, there were 17 buildings on the site, 15 single-family homes and 2 small apartment buildings, and they were all built between about 1890 and 1927. So fortunately, when the city came up with this plan, there was a group of, so 1890 to 1927. I mean, that's not very old in a lot of places in the world, or even a lot of places in Canada. But for Vancouver, it's 1890 is old for us. So a group of people through the Community Arts Council of Vancouver came back to the city and they said, we're losing too much of our heritage building. We want to try to preserve it, and gave a little bit of a pushback. In 1970, so this was in 1966, this went on for quite some time. In 1976, Roedde House was given a Heritage A classification. And there were 2 reasons for that. One was the Roedde family who the house was built for, and the other is the architect who designed the house. And I am going to talk about that in a little bit. So once that happened, and it had a Heritage A designation which protected it, there was a new focus on developing the property more as what they called a park with houses. Of the 17 buildings, they decided 9 could be saved. So along Harrow, there are three buildings, three identical houses called the triplets that were built a little later than Roedde House. Or sorry, that was on Broughton. On Harrow, there's another three houses, again, a little bit younger. And then along Barclay Street, there is Roedde House Museum. Next to that, Barclay Manor, which was built a little bit later and is now a senior citizen center for the West End. And on the corner of the street on Barclay is the George Weeks House, which is owned by our health authority and is used for the Friends for Life Society. So those are kind of the public buildings. And that's how it became a museum. And as I already mentioned, the vision was to have a museum that would be very accessible for people and very interactive. That Roedde House was built in 1893. It's a Queen Anne revival style of architecture, and that was very popular in Canada from about 1870 through the First World War. And some of the features of the house, again, that you're looking at are, it's called an asymmetrical design. So, you know, the door is sort of off to one side on the porch. Porches and verandas. So there are two porches on the main floor and a veranda on the second floor. It's a 2.5-story building. The main floor, the second floor, and then on the side, and maybe we could go to the next slide at this point. On the side is a turret, which is like a tower going up the side of the house, and it extends up above the roof line and is capped in this octagonal dome shape called a cupola, which is, again, these are all features of the Queen Anne architecture. So next slide, please. This is showing the front porch for the Roedde House. What I'd like to do for the tour today is I'd actually like to do this as though we're actually walking through, as if you're there with me in the house and we're just walking through. And we're going to do it as a pre-COVID style, because that makes more sense to the story of the house. And it's just really great to be able to do it. So this slide is showing the wooden steps up to the porch, the front porch. To the left side are bay windows with lace curtains hanging in them. To the right of the door, you can't really see it in this photo very well. There's a stained glass window. And then if we could go to the next slide, this is actually a close-up of the front door. So the front door is wooden. It's painted kind of a reddish brown. It has a window in it with lace curtains. And below in the sort of the bottom third of the door is a slotted mailbox where the mail would slide through. And then between the window and the mailbox is what looks like a key, something that, for example, you would use to wind a music box. That's actually the doorbell. So what you would do to gain entrance to the house is you would come up and you would ring the doorbell by twisting that key, which rings a bell that we can hear in the house. We actually do have a regular modern doorbell, but it doesn't actually work as well as this one. It's not quite reliable.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes the older the technology, the better it works.
Indeed, indeed. So we could have the next slide. Okay, so now this is where we've stepped through the door into the entryway. So this slide is showing part of the entryway. I think you had mentioned these slides are actually very current. They were taken quite recently, and Roedde House, depending on the weather outside, really affects the lighting inside too. So you'll find that may vary a little bit. When you step through the door, you're stepping into an entryway that is essentially rectangular. In this slide, it's showing you there's a desk sort of to the middle left of it, which is where we it's where we would check visitors in to the house. And straight ahead we don't have a gift shop per se in the house because we're small. We have a gift stand. So there's a lighted stand that has a variety of items related to, with connections to the house that are for sale. Some of the things that are going to be in the gift bag that we give away.
Right.
If you're standing in the front door looking in, so it's not showing in this photo, there's a settee to the side, a couch to sit on, a small table, which is set up with a platter to receive calling cards from visitors, with a photograph of the architect, who I'll talk about in a minute. To the left are two large wooden sliding pocket doors that lead off into the parlor. Straight ahead in this picture are the stairways. There's two sets of stairways in the house. These are the front stairs, and they're kind of a spiral stairs that go up and turn around to the landing on the second floor. At the foot of them, what you'll see is a statue on the newel post with a lamp, and I'll talk again about that in a couple of minutes.
So, Cindy, before you go further, can you just give us an idea of the style of this house in terms of, I mean, it seems to me to be very much wood trims, rich wood colors, that kind of idea, but maybe go into some detail about that.
Okay, yeah, you're absolutely right. So the house was built with local materials, local fir and cedar, which were very plentiful and inexpensive at the time. And it's been restored to reflect that. The original banister that's in this photo going up is wood. The floors in the house are fir, and most of them are covered with area rugs. So you can still see the wooden flooring, but with the area rugs. The windows typically have lace curtains on them, which we know that the Roeddes did. Throughout the house, the colors of the walls, so if, for example, in this part of the room, the walls are a painted plaster, and they're sort of, again, an apple green color. When the house was being restored and they were peeling down layers in the wall, they would find samples of the original colors or the original wallpaper, and had those reproduced. So as we go through the house, wallpaper colors are as close to the original as we could get, so from that time period.
And that's why I think when we had talked earlier about the house being very accessible to touch, it's because some of these things are reproductions, and so they're not, you know, as precious as the actual artifact maybe from.
Well, actually, they're not. Everything in the house is a real artifact. I think what you can think of it is there are artifacts that are for display and that artifacts for sale, should we say, educational purposes, right? So that, and so the ones that are determined to be educational, people can touch and interact with, and we expect there'll be a certain amount of wear and tear on those.
Great.
Cool. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so one of the things that I really like about the Roedde House, or what really appeals to me, is that, you know, the house itself architecturally is interesting, the artifacts are interesting, but the fact is people lived here. They lived in this house, and when they did, things were happening in their city and their country and the world that they were a part of. And I find that really interesting, the history we have around the people that lived here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the family. I'm sorry, I should have explained this slide that we're showing now. There's a slide that's showing a portrait. This hangs on the wall in the entryway. It's a formal studio photograph of the Roeddes and some of their children. The Roeddes had 7 children, 4 girls and 3 boys. This particular photograph was taken in 1896. And what it shows is in the back, standing is Mr. Roedde, Gustav Roedde. And on the other side in the back is his wife, Matilda, and between them is their youngest child. In the front row, on the right is one of their daughters, Emma, their son, Bill, and their adopted son, Walter. So the Roedde House, and Roedde House was built in 1893, and it was built for the Roedde family. So Gustav Roedde was actually born in Germany. He was orphaned at 13, but his parents had left money for his education. So he trained as a bookbinder and printer in Leipzig in Germany. And when he completed his apprenticeship, plans were made for him to travel to the United States, to Cleveland, Ohio, where he had an uncle. And the plan was that he would live and work as a bookbinder with his uncle. Unfortunately, as he was traveling from Germany to the United States, his uncle contracted yellow fever and died. So he arrived in Cleveland not knowing anyone, not speaking any English. But fortunately for him, the population of Cleveland in those days was about 40% German. So he actually, through that community, made friends and met his wife, Matilda. Kasselbaum was her name. Matilda's family actually came from a place called Heligoland, which I had never heard of prior to starting at Roedde House. Heligoland is a small archipelago in the North Sea. It's north of Germany, west of Denmark. And over the years, it has been self-governed under Danish rule. Right now it's part of Germany, but for about 80 years in the 1800s, it was a British protectorate. So Matilda spoke fluent English as well as German. She traveled on a British passport and identified as having this English background. So in the family, you had those two cultures, the English and the German, and that also shows up in parts of the house as we go through them. So they married in Cleveland, and like many immigrants, they moved west, first to San Francisco. And then in 1888, Mr. Roedde was hired by the Queen's printer to be their bookbinder, and they moved north to Victoria on Vancouver Island. Now in 1888, the population of Vancouver was about 1,000 people. Population of Victoria was 8,000. So it was actually the bigger city at the time. And so Mr. Roedde, they lived and worked there for a while. He was quite an entrepreneur, so he was interested in starting his own business. But in Victoria at that time, there were already 2 established bookbinders. There was a bit of an economic depression, so he wasn't really able to to establish himself then. I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong date. It was 1886 he moved to Victoria. In 1888, he was then, so 2 years later, he was essentially headhunted by a local newspaper in Vancouver to come and be their binder. So at that point, he moved the family to Vancouver, not yet to the property on Barclay Street, but to another property. And then within a couple of years, he opened his own business, bookbinding business, and was doing well enough by 1893 that they were able to purchase this property on Barclay Street and hire an architect to design and build the house. At the time they bought the property, the West End was not downtown Vancouver. It was really out in the sticks. So downtown Vancouver in those days would have been more in the Gastown area. That's where Mr. Roedde had his business. But the West End was being promoted very much as for families who were kind of up and coming and wanted to better themselves. This was a good place to purchase. So Mr. Roedde was in fact Vancouver's first bookbinder. And that is one of the reasons the house had the designation of as a heritage building, because of him being the first bookbinder. The other reason is the architect who he hired to design the house. So the house has been attributed to Francis Rattenbury, and some people, particularly in BC, might recognize that name. Rattenbury at that time was a young, unknown architect from Leeds, England. He'd only been in Vancouver about a year. But the same year that the Roedde House was built, Rattenbury won the contest to design the legislative buildings in Victoria, in our capital. And so he went on to design those. He went on to design a number of very prominent public buildings, such as the Empress Hotel in Victoria. In Vancouver, he designed an earlier version of the Hotel Vancouver, which no longer exists, and our old law courts, which are now our art gallery. Mm-hmm. And because of that association as well, the house is notable. We say that it's attributed to him because we don't actually have any documentation or house plans with his name on it. What we do have is a lot of oral history from the family, the children remembering Mr. Roedde and Mr. Rattenbury meeting. Mrs. Roedde didn't like him very much. She really wanted a basement in this house, and he wouldn't give her that. She was quite bitter about that. And so Rattenbury, he very talented man, very talented architect, not a very nice man, and he became quite famous for his architectural work in Western Canada and quite infamous for his personal life. So if we can get the next slide, please. Okay, so there's a couple of things of interest in the entranceway particularly. So this photo is showing a bit of a close-up of the foot of the stairways. There's a post on the banister at the foot of the stairway that has a statue on it. The background of this photo, to the right is a grandfather clock, and to the left is a doorway that leads into the parlor. And we'll talk about both of those later. This newel post lamp is original to the house. The Roeddes actually brought it back from France, from a trip they made to France. these kinds of newel post lamps, I'm sorry, the lamp itself is the statue of a woman holding a torch aloft, a little bit like the Statue of Liberty, but a bit more, I don't know, sexy.
Yeah. And how high is this sculpture on top
Oh,
of this post, would you say? Does it go all the way up to the ceiling,
oh
or?
no, no, no. Sorry, I'm going to say it's a couple of feet tall.
Okay.
Okay, so it fits onto the
But
post.
it's very prominent.
It is prominent. And the thing is, these type of newel post lamps were very popular in homes of wealthy families. Now, the Roedde family was a middle class family. And I think that's another thing that's very interesting about going through this house is that it's a house that was originally designed for a middle class family, but definitely one that had aspirations for sort of moving up in society. So in homes of wealthy families, these newel post lamps would be made of bronze. This is actually a knockoff. It's made of spelter. So bronze is copper and tin, spelter is copper and zinc. So you kind of get the look of it, but it's, it would be less expensive.
Sorry, Cindy, do we know what happened to the original?
This is the original.
But I thought you just said it was a knockoff, so now I'm confused.
Oh, sorry. No, what I meant is if you were shopping for a designer handbag, right? And you couldn't afford it because it was like $500.
Oh, so you mean this was a knockoff from the 1800s?
Of the time.
At the time.
Sorry,
Gotcha.
I wasn't clear on that.
So
yeah.
It's original to the time, but it was not as expensive as what the wealthy homeowner would be able to have afforded.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, I wasn't clear on that.
That's okay.
That's all right. So right now this lamp, it's not lit up in this photo, but it would be lit with electricity now. At the time the Roeddes moved into the house, there was no electricity, so it would have been gas lit at that time.
Very cool.
That did remind me I was going to say something else and I've forgotten, but it will come back to me, I'm sure. Can we get the next slide, please? Okay. So this is what we're going to do now is we're going to move from the entryway into the parlor. So if you remember, I mentioned as you step in the front door, immediately to the left, there are these two large wooden pocket doors. So when you open them, they kind of disappear into the walls and they leave about a 4-foot opening in the wall that opens up into the parlor. The parlor is the most formal room. So what we're doing is, in this view, is we're standing in the doorway looking into the parlor. In the center of the room is a small round table with an oil lamp on it. To the left is a settee with an armchair on either side. And behind that are the bay windows in the house looking out over the front yard with lace curtains hanging on them. There is a lamp between the settee and the armchair that's lit of the period. That's what I was going to say. The Roeddes lived in the house from 1893 to 1924, at which point they sold it and they moved further west in the city, actually out to Point Grey area, for those of you who are local. When they moved, they obviously took all their things with them. But when the house was being restored, the grandchildren, their daughter-in-law and some of the grandchildren were around and actually donated items back to the house.
Oh, neat.
So to your point, everything in the house is an actual artifact, some of which belong to the family. Other items have been either purchased or donated or on loan to us.
Right, but belong to the time period.
Yeah, and it's been restored to that period between 1893 and 1924.
And what would a parlor room be used for in 1893?
It was the most formal room in the house. So it would have been for entertaining the Roedde's parents' friends. So sort of an adult-oriented room. Mm-hmm. Can't really see it in this photo. So you may see there's a figure in the photo, a mannequin right now that is roped off in this particular photo. That's because just very recently we had a fundraiser which missing the word, focused on clothing of fashion of the 1920s. So we did have some mannequins set up in the rooms. Normally that would not be there. Just to the right of where that mannequin is a piano, an upright grand piano. So Roedde families, they were very musical. They like to play it. So they might have a family evening in here, a musical evening playing the piano. But otherwise it would be more if their guests came to visit, they may play games, visit, do puzzles, that kind of thing.
And this room again is very rich with that, you know, the theme of those, the dark, rich woods. And you had mentioned the long lace curtains that kind of go from the ceiling all the way down to the floor. And even the furniture that's in there has this really beautiful tufting almost. And I'm not sure what the word is, but it's got kind of a beigey milky color with the dark wood. So really nice contrast, but there's a tufting. So no cushions, but there's like what would you call that, Cindy?
That's exactly what I would call it.
Yeah. Okay.
Call it that. Yes, you're right.
So it kind of looks like a series of buttons kind of being sewed into the backrest of the chair and the settee that makes it kind of look like it's got dimples in it.
Exactly. And the wainscoting, the wood wainscoting in the room that comes up about, I think about a little less than a third of the way up the wall, and the color of the walls, the painted green plaster, follows through from the entranceway. It's the same.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Can I have the next slide, please? So as we stepped in from the door, immediately to our right is the fireplace. This is the only fireplace in the house. So this is showing a fireplace with quite a tall mantle, a warm wooden colored surround and mantle with shelving on it, quite ornate. Around the actual fireplace opening are tiles in a beige and cream. So this fireplace is not original to the house. The hearth tiles that you cannot see in this picture but are there, they are original, but the original fireplace was taken out at some point. However, when the house was being restored, this fireplace was being taken out of another house that was being demolished nearby, and they donated it to us. So again, not original to the house, but an original fireplace from that time. Right now we have an electrical insert in it, but originally it would have burned coal or wood and would have been one of the sources of heat in the house along with the stove in the kitchen. So this is immediately to the right of the sliding doors or the pocket doors we walk through. And then on the other side of this fireplace are another two large wooden doors that open up into the next room. So if I could then have the next slide, please. Okay, so one of the things I think is kind of cool about this house is in Roedde House, there's essentially no hallways. The doors, the rooms basically flow one into the other. So this is stepping from the parlor into the dining room. And in the center of the room, so we are actually standing, I counted in the dining room, there are actually 5 doors leading off of this particular room. So we have walked in from what is the left-hand side of this slide. We are looking at the dining table. So there's a table in the middle of the room. There's 4 chairs around it, but it would seat 6. Immediately behind the table in the slide are again another set of bay windows with the long lace curtains out to the side of the house. Just to the left of those windows is a door that leads out into a very small veranda. And then to the right, it's a little hard to see in this particular slide, there's a sideboard where there would be the various china and so on that they would keep for the dining room. We have 2 display cases in here that show off some of the china and other items. The wainscoting, the wooden wainscoting in this room goes up quite a bit higher in the wall, about 2/3 of the way up, and then has a plate rail. So a little wide space where people could display china plates. And then above that is our wallpaper. We have wallpaper in this room. So the function of the dining room, it actually would have been more like a family room as we understood it. So they would eat meals here, and they might have, if they were entertaining their guests for dinner, they would eat in here. But day to day, the kids would do their homework in here. They might play in here if it was a typical rainy day in Vancouver. Um, I had mentioned, the Roedies had the German cultural background, so they celebrated Christmas with German traditions. So this is where they would have had their Christmas tree, and it would have been sort of over towards where the bay windows are. In 1913, again, it would have been a live tree, and it would have had real candles on it. So candles would have been clipped on, decorating it. Right. In 1913, they left the tree up, I guess, a little longer perhaps than usual, and it had maybe dried out a little bit. And someone knocked it over, and there was in fact a fire. The house did catch on fire. Quite a lot of damage, both to this room and to the parlor. What really saved it, because as I mentioned, it's a wooden building made out of local materials. What saved it is that about a block and a half from Roedde House is Vancouver Fire Hall number 6, which is also a heritage building. Mm-hmm. It was built about 6 years prior to the time this fire occurred. So no phone in the house at that time, as far as I know. So someone would have had to run to the fire department to bring them back, but they did get there. They did manage to save the building. Quite a bit of damage, as I said, to the dining room and the parlor. So those were renovated. Those 2 rooms at least were renovated in 1913, so a little more modern, and were renovated more in an arts and crafts style. Again, what I think is very cool in this room, and you can't really see it in the slide, is that the wooden wainscoting along the side has panels in it. And the panels are a maroon color, a dark red color, and they are actually made of buckram. And buckram is a bookbinding material. So it's a cloth that's been stiffened by starch or glue, and then used in things like bookbinding or hat making. And it would have been a kind of material that Mr. Roedde would have had access through his business, in a fairly inexpensive way to do that part of the renovation. And the cool thing is Mr. Roedde's company still exists today, excuse me. It's no longer owned by the family, but in Richmond, there is a G.A. Roedde printer, and they actually provided the buckram when they were doing the restoration in the house.
So a little bit of the modern world coming to the rescue.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay. And so this is this slide, just very briefly. This is another view of the dining table. Sort of from the opposite side, but I wanted to put it in because, again, it shows you in the background are the doors. So to the left is a door we're going to go through in a minute to the parents' room. Right next to it is a door leading to the kitchen, and then to the right is a door leading out to the entryway. So again, I thought that was kind of interesting when I figured out it was like 5 doors from this room. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so what we're doing is we've gone out the door to the left, and we're stepping immediately into the parents' bedroom. This would have actually been probably the most comfortable room in the house, because as we're looking into it, the wall behind us is adjacent to the kitchen where the stove is. So there would have been it would have been a very warm and comfortable room. What we're seeing in this slide is to the right part of the bed that the parents would have had. On the walls, which are wallpapered, they're kind of cream with stripes down in a floral pattern. And there's a number of old photographs on the wall. The one to the right of the gentleman with the mustache, that is Mr. Roedde. There's several family photographs throughout the house that are that show sort of changing styles as we go. He usually has some version of a mustache, and you can see the changes in that. To the right of the bed by the window, again, a tall window with lace curtains, is a small crib, bassinet for the baby. So again, middle-class family, they didn't have a separate nursery. Whatever the current baby was would be in with the parents. And then at the foot of the bed is a woman's dressing table with a very tall mirror where she could sit at the vanity and do hair and so on. And to the right is a gentleman's dressing table. So the items, the artifacts that are on the ladies' dressing table tend to do things like with hair, hair curlers of the curling irons of the time, what's called a hair saver, where you would take hair from your brush or your comb and you would collect it up until you had enough. You'd sew it into a little netting or muslin fabric piece called a hair rat. and then that would tuck up under your hair to puff it up to do some of the hairstyles of the time.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I think this is very cool. This is new information to me that I think is cool. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a slide ahead of myself. Sorry, this is a photo of the Roedde's bed. This is a two-person bed. I would say that for us, it's probably the width of 1.5 single beds as we would know it today. So it's much narrower than what we would consider a double bed this day. So this is showing a bed. It has a high wooden headboard. The headboard has a piece that has like a fabric fill-in. There's a quilt at the foot of the bed, a number of pillows at the top of the bed to prop up. On the bed is a bed warmer, so a brass pan that you would put coal or hot sand in, and a long wooden handle, and that would be used to run under the covers to warm up the bed. On the side table is a jug and bowl that would have been used for washing. The reason I put the bed in, this was something interesting I learned, is that, so the bed is narrower. That kind of is because, people would want to be sort of kept close together for body heat, especially in our cold and damp climate here. The bed also beds at that time often tend to seem short to us. And some people think it's because people in those times were shorter. Well, actually they weren't. But what they did believe at that time was that it was unhealthy to sleep flat. That if you slept lying down flat, you would actually get sick with things like pleurisy and pneumonia and tuberculosis and upper respiratory diseases. So they actually believed that sleeping propped up was healthier. And then, of course, if you did have an upper respiratory illness, that you would be more comfortable with that. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so this is a picture of the gentleman's dressing table. And there were just two things I wanted to kind of point out. So in the center, the table on a shelf is what looks like a tall tea mug. It's white porcelain. It's got beautiful, delicate pink roses painted on it. This is actually a man's shaving mug. And what I find interesting is that 100 years ago, pink was actually considered a masculine color. So 200 years ago, we think of gender reveals where, pink for the girls, blue for the boys. 200 years ago, there was no really gender color association with children. Children's clothes, for example, tended to be white. In the 1920s, they were starting to associate color and gender, but at that time it was the opposite to what we would think. So pink was considered a masculine color, and blue was actually considered a feminine color. And it wasn't until the 1950s that the pink as girl, blue as boy sort of was established. And I found that really interesting because, obviously people of 100 years ago in many ways were like us, but then there's also ways that their thoughts were different, things that they accepted that were different than what we were and may seem a little bit strange to us.
And of course, the conversation today around binaries, gender binaries, and association with colors for male and female genders is completely being revolutionized again,
Exactly.
which, there's a precedent for this in history. And I love that. So thank you for sharing that, because although I can actually remember seeing movies and things that were dated way back when a baby was dressed all in white, almost in a dress that was similar to what you might have considered for like a religious ceremony. But it was always white. And I never made the connection until you just said it now about the fact that there were no colors really associated with gender. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And the reason it was white was because it was easier to bleach clean.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was why.
My grandmother would tell me that today. She's 96, and she would tell me that all her linens are white, and probably because when she grew up on the farm, they were easier to bleach.
There you go. Something I learned. I would have thought white would be not a good choice, but yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about was, so on this table, there are 3 photographs. These are the 3 Roedde boys. The one most in front, sorry, the 2 on the left, excuse me. The 2 on the left are in World War I military uniform. The one in the front is Walter, Roedde's adopted son, and the one behind is their older son, Bill. The one on the right, which is, I think he's only 15 in that picture, that's Gus Jr., and he's dressed up kind of in his suit. World War I was a really difficult time for the family. So prior to 1914, the German community in Vancouver was very well accepted. But by the time 1915 came around, attitudes were starting to change. There were articles in the local paper advocating people not shop at German businesses. Mr. Roedde had to hire a Canadian-born floor manager for his business. Mrs. Roedde was ostracized from her church. And there was some comment made, this was written in one of the places, where the cupola, the dome on the top of their tower, resembled a Prussian helmet. Mm-hmm. In 1916, so when World War I started, the three oldest Roedde children were already married and out of the house. And the two boys, Walter and Bill, independently both decided that they wanted to enlist and go overseas. And this was a really sore point with Mr. Roedde. It was very difficult for him. He really believed that, they potentially could be overseas fighting family members, and so it was very difficult. They did, in fact, both go over. They both fought. As far as I know, neither of them were seriously physically injured, but they came back probably with what we would know today as PTSD. Mm-hmm. Gus, who was the younger son, the boy in the picture on the right, he was still living at home at that time, so probably maybe a little bit more under his dad's influence. Plus, the boys all worked in the family business. So as they and other young men left to go fight overseas, that became an issue for them as well. In 1917, Canada got conscription, and Gus was determined to be, that he could be drafted. And he was conscripted in August of 1918, but he was only posted to the North Shore. And then, of course, by November 1918, the war was over. So he never ended up going overseas. Right. Okay, so I just wanted to sort of talk about that history. So the next slide, please.
And I'll let you know, Cindy, that we're at 40 minutes into the tour, just so you're aware.
I was noticing that. Oh, so this is into the den. The den is the last room on the main floor that we're going to talk about immediately. It is originally was a sleeping porch, but when the fire happened, Mr. Roedde had it renovated into his sort of personal area, a place where he could come and sit and listen to music, where he could smoke his pipe. The Roedde family he also raised St. Bernards. So they lived in this house with 6 kids and 3 St. Bernards at one point. In the den are mainly things reflecting Mr. Roedde's interest in a number of items that are family items. This particular picture these are Easter eggs. They're in a display case in the den, and these were made by Mr. Roedde. So on the right, what it is it's a goose egg. On the left, it's a duck egg. These eggs have been cut in half. They've been covered in fabric, and then the inner part is a little gift. So what Mr. Roedde would do would be put a little bottle of perfume, or in this case, what you see are 2 little dolls in there, and these were given to his grandchildren at Easter. Give me the next slide, please. Okay, these are 2 deer heads mounted on the wall in the den, and I apologize if people find them. Some people don't like that. The reason I find it interesting, these are 2 deer that Mr. Roedde shot in Stanley Park in 1906, and that have been mounted. For me, what it is a reminder of how much large wildlife was still in the area when the family lived here. So obviously there's no deer in Stanley Park now, and it's not because Mr. Roedde shot them all. But at that time, in this area in the West End, there were wolves, there were bear, and there were large deer. And although these are mounted as trophies, they would have used the entire animal. They would have used the meat. I'm not sure if they would have traded the skins or whatever. Okay, can we change, next slide, please? And this again is just kind of an overview of the den, but I think we'll move on. If we can, the next slide, please. Okay, so what we're going to do now for the tour is we've come out of the den, back through the parents' bedroom, back through the dining room, and now we've stepped into an alcove at the bottom of the stairs. And I just quickly wanted to point out this clock. This is a long case clock. It is the oldest artifact in the house. It's from 1775. It's still a working clock. It was made by a gunsmith in Wigan, England. So it runs for 8 days. So it's a tall, grandfather clock style in wood with a very elaborate face with the clock. What I know two things about this. So one is the Roeddes would not have been able to afford this when they lived here. And the other is this particular clock has a connection to Lord Stanley. So Stanley Park, Stanley Cup. It actually came from one of his estates, was given to someone who worked for him, who gave it to a family member who eventually donated it to the house. But it's quite cool if you're there to visit.
And how tall does that clock actually stand, do you think, Cindy?
I would say, well, I'm 5'3". It's probably over 6 feet tall.
Yeah, okay. It seems quite enormous.
It is. It's very tall, like not to the ceiling, but I would say it's probably over 6 feet. You can't see it in the case. It has two long heavy metal lead weights that it runs, and it runs for 8 days. And then it needs to be, and it runs by being wound. Okay, could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so this is just a picture of the stairs, the front stairs going up to the second floor. They sort of go up in a curve. I have the next step, or next slide, please. And this is at the top of the stairs. So I'm just to the left, you can just see through a half open door, a set of very steep stairs. These go up to the cupola, to the tower at the top. This is not open even during regular times to visitors because of the steepness of the stairs. The cupola was used for sleeping twice that I know of. Once for one of the Roedde daughters, but it turned out that she was a sleepwalker, and when they found her out on the roof of the house, they put an end to that. The second time was when the house was being used as a rooming house, a boarding house. The woman who ran the boarding house had a teenage son, and he slept up there as well. But most of the time, it was used for Mrs. Roedde would start her flowers up there. Mr. Roedde would put out fruit from the trees in their yard to ripen. There is a 360-degree view from the top of the cupola. However, at the time the Roeddes lived here, you didn't have to go that high up in the house to have a view. You would have a view from the second floor because, of course, none of the high-rise apartment buildings existed at the time, and the trees were newly planted, so they were low. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, this is the girls' room, the girls' bedroom. So as you stand on the landing, there are 4 doors leading off. One of the bedrooms is not available. It's just now our office. And this is next door. It's been set up as the girls' bedroom. It was, in fact, the girls' bedroom. So it's quite busy in there. It has a lot of items and artifacts that would have been related to being a girl at that time. We can see the bottom of the bed with the iron bedstead, and there's a bunch of traveling trunks and suitcases there. On the mannequin to the left are some underclothing, which give you the fabric. Also hanging on the doorway are also some undergarments. There's a dresser, and to the right, again, another long window, this time with the green shades pulled down.
And sorry, Cindy, I think we should just, quantify what we mean by undergarments, because again, the time period here in late 1800 possibly to early 1900s, we're not talking about panties and bras or boxers.
No, so we're talking about bloomers, and I think you would call a chemise, right?
Yeah,
so it's 2 pieces, so long bloomers, lace lined, and then on the door I think is a nightgown that's hanging, so again a long to the ground nightgown. Yes, again
in the white fabrics that are easily bleachable.
Exactly, thank you, you're right, absolutely. Can we go to the next slide, please? These are actually on the top of the bed. They are 2 dolls, and they are with porcelain faces. The one on the left has sort of a bob haircut and is blonde, and the one on the right has long flowing dark tresses, and they're dressed again in sort of, I would say, children's style clothing, white on the left, and again, as we said, a blue dress on the right with some white lace and pink trim. And they're both wearing little booties or shoes and some stockings. I believe these are about 100 years old. The hair is actually real human hair. And the dolls are articulated, right? So their arms and legs would bend and articulate, and their eyes would close if you lay them flat. Can I have the next slide? Okay, so I just want to tell you, I know I am watching the time, but there's 2 sad stories, according with the house, that both had to do with the Roedde's daughters. The Roedde's oldest daughter, Anna, died very young when she was just 4 years old.
And sorry, Cindy, who is this a picture of that we're looking at?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. This picture is on the dresser. This is the Roedde's second youngest daughter as an adult. Her name was Anna Catherine Roedde. She shows a young woman sitting in front of a formal building in a nursing uniform, a nursing student uniform. And I'm going to talk about her in a moment. But I just want to sort of set it up by saying that, as I said, the Roedde's oldest daughter, Anna, died young. She actually came home one day, had blue stains around her lips, complaining of a stomach ache. Very shortly after, went into convulsions and died. They weren't able to save her. And it was very tragic in the family. Now, in British Columbia, if you have an unattended and unexplained or a youth death, the coroner automatically becomes involved. And if the coroner wishes, they can request it. They can ask for an inquest to investigate the death. They did that in the case of the first Anna. And a coroner's inquest is fact-finding. It's not fault-finding. It's really to get more information about what happened. However, it's set up very much like a trial. There's a jury, there's witnesses, and Mrs. Roedde had to testify at this. And this was an extremely traumatic experience for her because she actually felt, or there was a feeling in the family, that perhaps she was being accused of something. So they had this early death that was very tragic. And then, as was not uncommon in those days, often a new baby might be named after an older child who had passed away. So the next girl baby that they had, they also named Anna. This is Anna Catherine. And the other story, sad story, is related to her. So Anna Catherine did grow up to adulthood, and when she was in her 20s, decided to train as a nurse. And so she was training at Vancouver General Hospital. And in 1925, she was working an evening shift, and a patient who'd been discharged the day before had returned to the ward and was visiting a friend. Anna knew him. They had chatted, I guess, a bit. We don't know what triggered him, but he suddenly attacked her with a razor, slit her throat. The only reason she survived the attack initially was because she was in the hospital. He then tried to kill himself, but was unsuccessful in that. And she died about 30 hours later. So he was charged with her murder and was in fact sentenced to death and executed later that year. So again, very tragic events in the family's life around that. It was very difficult for them. The name Anna is not really used in the family anymore because of that. Okay, come to the next slide, please. So just briefly, this is a photo. It shows 4 children standing in the water in bathing suits of the time. So kind of like boy short cuts, like one full piece that come up to the top, dark navy colors with lighter color trim. They're standing in the water. This is actually taken at Horseshoe Bay. And the children on either side, the left and the right, are 2 of the Roedde grandchildren. The one on the right, Kay, actually grew up to become Vancouver's, British Columbia's actually first female lifeguard. So can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so as you leave the girls' bedroom, there is a little, it's almost a passageway room. It's about 4 steps long, honestly, with bay windows along the side. This is Mrs. Roedde's sewing room. And so what we're looking at now is a small armchair. Mrs. Roedde was very short. She was only 4'8.5". And this was a chair that actually belonged to her that she took with her when they left the Barclay Street house, but was again donated back. It's the same chair, although it's been reupholstered. Mrs. Roedde was a very talented seamstress. She actually, before her marriage, worked for a tailor. So that was a skill she had and taught to all of her children, all of her girl children as well. Have the next one, please. And again, this is just another view of her armchair. You can see how close down it is to the ground. It almost looks like a child's chair.
Is there a vintage sewing machine in this room that we're able to see?
Yes, I think. Can you actually go to the next one?
Ah, perfect.
So actually, this is not there is a vintage Singer's sewing machine in that room, a full-sized adult one. What you're looking at here is a toy version, or a miniature version. So Mr. Roedde was very much what we'd call an early adopter. He loved technology and so on. So he actually bought his granddaughters these small workable sewing machines that could be clipped onto the side of the because the sewing machine would have been a piece of furniture, right? The Singer sewing machine. It would have been clipped onto the side, and it would actually be a way for them to make clothes for their dolls and to learn to sew.
So how would you describe this? Because it's quite, it almost looks like a medical device.
Yeah, so what you're seeing here is just the angle of the shot. It's in a box. So if you took it out, it would look like a miniature Singer sewing machine with the wheel on the side and the needle, the plate for the fabric to go over and the needle to go down. What you're seeing here is the top of it. So on the right at the back is a spool of thread, white thread that has not been yet threaded through to the machine. You can see part of the wheel there, and the arm across the front, this piece of metal would be what would pull the needle up and down. And in the back is obviously a book or a label that says, "A Singer for the Girls, teaches them to make clothes for their dolls."
Right, because it's technically a toy.
Right, exactly. Okay, let me go on to the next slide. So again, this is the boys' room, and it's got a single narrow bed in it with a iron bedspread. Again, the wooden floors with an area rug covering it. Bit smaller room. The artifacts in this room are reflective of boy interests at the time. So games that they might play. There's a sled in there, some tennis rackets. The family was very into sailing, very interested in sailing. Can I see the next slide, please? Okay, on the bed, we have 2 bathing costumes. And again, for the boys, they would cover the top as well as the bottom. So like sort of a short thing straight up. And we have a number of pamphlets talking about Joe Fortes. Joe Fortes was a gentleman who was Vancouver's first lifeguard. He was actually the unofficial lifeguard initially. He came from the West Indies, came into Vancouver in 1885. He was also on his way to Victoria, but his boat broke down and it was towed into Vancouver Harbor, and he decided to stay here. And he basically appointed himself an unofficial lifeguard. And he taught hundreds of Vancouver children to swim, including the Roedde children and grandchildren. Interesting thing about swimming in Vancouver at the time Joe was the lifeguard is that initially bathing was segregated. And at English Bay, there used to be a huge boulder, almost the size of a house. Women would swim on the west and men would swim on the east. And part of the lifeguard's duty was to be sure there was kind of no fraternizing in the middle. There was also expectations about modesty in the bathing costumes. And if your bathing suit looked like it might be a little bit short, a little bit too far above the knee, the lifeguard could come and measure it to be sure that it met the qualifications. Could I have the next slide, please?
And Joe Forte, there is a community center or a library too now in the West End.
Yeah, so there's Joe Forte.
And there's a restaurant too. That's
exactly Joe Forte's library, the restaurant, and there's a fountain actually that's dedicated to him. He was very prominent. When he died in 1922, there was a huge funeral. Thousands of people lined the streets, probably the Roeddes included. So just back onto the landing and to the right is the bathroom. Now, the one thing I say about this bathroom, so what it's showing you is, again, can't see clearly, to the right is a clawfoot tub. Just behind that is a pedestal style sink. And to the left is a toilet. There's wooden wainscoting around the side and then white plaster above. The thing about this is that this bathroom was original to the house. It was built in 1893, but they couldn't use it for the first 10 years because there was no sewage connection that far out in the city. Okay, next slide, please.
So they built the bathroom in preparation for when sewage, when it was going to be usable, I guess.
That's right. They were forward thinking. They were very
forward thinking. I love it.
Yeah, and it'll be there someday.
One of the things that surprises me about these rooms, and maybe it shouldn't surprise me, is how tightly packed everything is. They feel kind of closed in, and maybe it's just because the way the photos are taken, but they just feel like almost that they're so small, that they're so packed to the gills. Even the bedrooms where, if you were going to navigate around spaces, you were kind of, it wasn't more than the width of a body to sort of get around the bed, like in the master, around the bed where the woman's dressing table was, like it's really, really tightly packed.
Yeah, and that's very true. I mean, the rooms are very compact. They make use of every inch of space, but also remember it's a museum, and that they probably wouldn't have had all those items in the bedroom. at the time. So this is just looking, the bathroom is that door to your right. This is just looking straight down a hall into what's now our collections area. So we'll just go right now to the next slide. This is the collections room. Originally, this was 2 rooms. At the front would have been a storage area for the Roeddes, and at the back would have been a space. They occasionally had help, either a maid or what was referred to at the time as a Chinese day boy. And so there would have been a room at the back for them to stay when they did stay overnight. Right now, it's been converted into a collections room. So down the left-hand side are glassed cabinets. On the right-hand side are some glass cabinets with spaces in between where the dormer windows are. There's a carpet running down the middle of here is what you see towards the back stairs of the house. And this, we have rotating displays in there. So different displays at different times focusing in. Can we get the next slide, please? Okay, so what we've actually done now, this is the kitchen. We've come all the way down the back stairs, which are the ones that the help would have used, through what would have been the pantry area. That has not been restored because it's our quote unquote modern kitchen, because we do weddings here, some events, and in non-COVID times, a tea and tour event afternoon on Sundays. So the kitchen is probably the closest to what the house looked like originally when they restored it. So what we're looking at now, we're standing in the doorway, looking into the kitchen towards the back door. To the left, there's windows on either side. To the left, there's a sink with a mannequin right now standing in front of it. To the right is the kitchen table. The floors in here are linoleum, and there's a huge sort of hooked or braided rug, round oval braided rug in the middle of the floor. To the left that you can't see in this picture is the stove, but let's go to the next photo. Okay, so this is a photo of the stove. I'm not sure the exact time. I mean, it'll be between 1893 and 1924. I posted a photo like this, and my mother said that was a stove that she had when she was a kid, and that would have been in the 1930s. But it's a black metallic stove with an oven door in the front. Right now it's got a tea towel hanging over it. That's the white thing. And it has a number of containers on top. So there's a large washing tub, made of brass, a brass stove. Like it looks like a canning pan there. And also irons for ironing clothes that you would heat onto the stove. Mm-hmm. So the stove was actually, multifunctional, right? It was for making food, for cooking, for baking, but it was also heating water for baths, for bathing people, for washing clothes, for, heating up the irons, for ironing the clothes when they did it.
And how was a stove like this function? Because there's no electricity in this house.
It would burn coal or wood.
Okay.
Coal or wood, yeah.
So there's some kind of door to
where you see the white towel hanging, to the left of that.
Okay, so where traditionally a stove would be on an oven door would be on a modern stove, it's just to the left of that, there's a place to put your coal or whatever. Yes, and on the side, it's hard to see, there's a little flap that looks like a mail flap in the door. Mm-hmm. That was a poker thing, so you could actually stick the poker in and stir around the right.
Coal and wood. Okay, and the next one. Next slide, please, sorry. Yeah, this just shows the original sink in the kitchen. It was very low down to the floor because Matilda was very short. It was put in specifically for her. They did have a water connection to the house in 1893 because we have the application they made to the city. Right now to the right, there's a little bit of sort of shelf space, counter space. That's the total counter space in the kitchen completely. Wow. There's a blue jug to the right of the sink, and that's actually a carpet beater that is sitting in there for cleaning rugs. And the next one, please. Next, yeah, thank you. So the kitchen is really a very rich in artifacts, rich in things to see, but I'm just mindful of our time, which is kind of running out. So I just wanted to talk about 2 things before we finish. This is a closer picture of the back door going out, and on a towel railing is a canvas piece of fabric that says BC Sugar Refinery, Rogers Sugar Refinery, granulated sugar, Vancouver, Canada. So this is in those days, we think maybe we're very modern when we do our recycling and our reusing, but repurposing was a very big thing in those times. So these sacks, these canvas sacks that were used for flour and sugar were often then used afterwards for either making towels in the kitchen, like dish towels, or even clothing, often like nightgowns for children and so on, night clothing for children. And in fact, it became popular enough that some companies began decorating their canvas bags, their products with flowers and other things so that it could be used for that after. One of the reasons I have this is there's a story about the Roedde's oldest son, Bill. He was actually involved in Vancouver's first pedestrian motor vehicle accident, but it has a happy ending. And it involves Mr. Rogers from the Rogers Sugar Refinery. So in 1900, Bill was out, he was 9 years old, he was out playing on the corner of Barclay and Nicola when he heard an automobile coming down the street. And this would have been an unusual thing to see at that time. So he's quite excited. So he stepped out in the street to get a better look. And Benjamin Rogers was driving along Nicola, made a turn onto Barclay and knocked down Bill. Fortunately, he wasn't seriously hurt, so Mr. Rogers picked him up, put him in the car, drove him home. Now it was kind of quite exciting because he'd had a ride in a car. But when I first heard this story, I was trying to kind of picture it in my mind how it would happen. And I sort of thought, well, I wonder what side of the road Mr. Rogers was driving on. And I thought, well, in 1900, he was probably driving on whatever side of the road he wanted on. There wasn't a lot of cars. But it turns out that prior to 1922 in Canada, which side of the road you drove on depended on where you lived, what province you lived in. So in Quebec, they drove on the right because of France. Ontario drove on the right because of Quebec. But in the Maritimes and in British Columbia, we drove on the left. In 1922, the country said, well, I think we've got to get our act together and figure out, get some consistency. And they ended up choosing to drive on the right because of the United States. People were driving on the right in the States. And Vancouver was actually the last city on continental North America to make that switch from left-handed to right-handed driving, because we had to switch the streetcars over, and it took an extra year to do that. So could I have the last slide, please? Okay, so actually I don't have to talk about this slide. That's usually how I complete my tour. Somebody had asked me what my favorite artifact was in the house, and that's this. Okay. So I'll leave it to you. I can tell you the story, but if you'd rather move on, because
Yes, absolutely, Cindy. We've got time to talk about this. So first of all, we keep saying this, and I want you to tell us what this is.
Yes, you're right. Thank you. Okay. So what we're looking at in the slide is a pink pamphlet that is titled The Carbolic Smoke Ball. Below it, it has the picture of a Victorian woman who's holding up this device to her nose and inhaling. And immediately in front of the pamphlet is the carbolic smoke ball, which is a glass ball cylinder with a metal top, with a long sort of metal tube that bends over to the right, which is a type of inhaler.
Yeah, so, it kind of looks to me like a round light bulb.
Yes.
That you would it's it's like a little bit like it's a device that you would smoke out of.
It does look like that, exactly. Yeah. So Roedde House has about 5,000 artifacts in it. And so obviously we don't know, docents don't know them all. We tend to sort of pick and choose, what we talk about as we go through rooms, depending on people's interests. So this is my favorite for two reasons. One is the story behind it, but also how I found out about it. And about 2 summers ago, I had just finished up a tour, and I was standing in the kitchen talking to some folks, and this couple came up to me with the pamphlet, and they were so excited. And they said, "Do you know about this?" And I said, "No, tell me." And so they were retired lawyers from the UK. And it turns out that the Carbolic Smoke Ball Company was part of a precedent-setting lawsuit that in English law that is still taught to lawyers today. And so I went home and I looked it up. And so the story is that from 1892 to 94, there was a huge flu epidemic in Europe and Russia. It was called the Russian flu. Not as bad as the 1918 epidemic, but it killed about 1 million people, including Queen Victoria's oldest grandson, who was in line for the throne. So that changed because of the flu. In 1891, the Carbolic Smoke Ball Company produced this item, and it claimed that if you used it according to their instructions, you would not catch the flu. And just to show how serious they were, if you did catch the flu, they would pay you £100, which today would be about $1,000. And to show their good faith, they put £1,000 in a bank. Well, in 1891, a Mrs. Louisa Carlyle bought this. She used it for 2 months, and then she caught the flu. So she tried to claim her £100. So at first, the companies just ignored her letters. And then finally, they said, well, okay, yeah, we'll pay you the £100, but just to be sure that, that this is fair to us, we want you to come in every day to our offices, show us how you're using it. Our secretary will check it out. And but it turns out that, so they were obviously trying to get out of it. It turns out Mrs. Carlyle's husband was a lawyer. So they took them to court. And as I said, they ended up winning the case, and it became precedent setting in unilateral contract law. And it, just as sort of an aside to wind it up, so Mrs. Carlyle did actually recover from that particular case of the flu, and she died at age 92 from the flu. So that's my story. So I am sorry I went over a bit, but
that's okay. I'd like you to unpack, because I remember this story that you told when we first met, and you just touched on it. But I think what's interesting is this particular Russian flu and how it affected the British monarchy as it is today. So can you just tell us that story?
Yeah. So when this flu epidemic happened, Prince Albert Victor was,
that's okay. We're back to people on the screen.
Okay. Prince Albert Victor was Queen Victoria's eldest grandson and was in line for the throne, but he contracted the flu and died. And at 24 or something, he's very young. At that time, he was engaged to Princess Mary of Teck. So because he died, his younger brother George became king. George was our Queen Elizabeth's grandfather. So it changed that line of inheritance. And actually, Princess Mary, who was supposed to marry the older brother, just ended up marrying George instead. So King George and Queen Mary, that was the line. But it's interesting, as I was saying, because the reason Queen Elizabeth is the queen today is not only because her uncle abdicated, over the Wallis Simpson thing, but also because what that would be her great uncle died of this flu during the epidemic.
So interesting to me how fortunes change, right?
Yeah.
And how that affects history. This is a fantastic place to visit. And I'm sure that the photos don't do it justice. Had we been in a time where we could meet in person, we would all be showing up at Roedde House together, and you'd be taking us on the tour and we'd be touching things. So I appreciate that. I'm going to open the floor for any questions from our audience members to use your raise a hand function, or please post it in the chat function. If you'd like to put it in chat, Donna will be monitoring the chat function. So if you want to have Donna read out your question, but I'll continue to chat with Cindy. But if you have any questions, please use the raise your hand function, and I will keep my eyeballs as peeled as I possibly can to spot your hand. Oh, and I see one already. Looks like it's Sharon. So Sharon, please go ahead. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, I had a couple quick questions. The pocket doors, I love pocket doors, but was that very unusual for the time?
Oh, I actually don't know the answer to that. I haven't heard it said that it was. What we know about the house is there are a few features that were kind of leading edge for the time. For example, I didn't mention it, but all of the bedrooms have closets, built-in closets, which was very unusual for that time. You would have expected an armoire or a wardrobe. But I'm sorry, Sharon, I don't know the answer to that.
No, that's fine. And then the other question was about a bathroom. Was there, I know they didn't have a sewage hookup, but was there a bathroom on the first floor or just on the second floor?
No, just on the second floor. Yeah.
And then did they have outhouses when it was first built?
Yes, they would have had an outhouse. And so when I started volunteering there initially, I was told there was no water at all. But as I said, we actually have the application from 1893 to the city of Vancouver for Mr. Roedde applied, which you paid for your water according to how many people were in your house, how many horses you had, whether you had an indoor bathroom or not. So they must have had, and the cost of it. So I cannot imagine him paying for something he did not yet, a service he did not yet have. So they would have used an outhouse or chamber pots maybe in the night, right? If they.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Sharon. Those are interesting questions. You know, I have to continue to remind myself what a privilege it is to have running water and to have electricity, to have flush operating toilets. And when I experience tours like this, it's a stark reminder of how different things were then as compared to now. Have you got a favorite room in the Roedde House, Cindy, that you just love to show?
You know, I wouldn't have said I had a favorite. I think the kitchen is very, like, you know, again, it's as we talked before around the timing of this, like there's so many more stories, there's so much more information that we could talk about. The kitchen, I think, is extremely interesting for a number of reasons. So I think if I had, that would probably be the favorite. It often depends, as I've said, you know, I often learn from the people who come through the house. So, and just often by the questions they ask. So for example, I had a group of UBC students come through on a tour who were focused on the kitchen and food at the time. And so there were questions, for example, like, well, what did they do with garbage? You know, and that's an interesting, because and I couldn't find it. There's a lot of, you can get a lot of history about garbage in the world and how it's been handled. But I mean, basically you either, you chuck it, you bury it, or you wash it away, like you throw it in the ocean kind of thing is typically, or burn it. So all of those styles. But apparently a friend of mine who's a retired archaeologist, she was saying that outhouses, for example, archaeologists really like them because people also use them to get rid of garbage.
Right, like a big composting system almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. Is there an outhouse that's on this 2+ acres of property today, or?
Not now, no, because what they've done with the next to the house now is a green space, quite a large lawn that the local folks will bring their dogs to play at, or their kids to wander around. So, you know, if you are to visit and it's a nice day and you have the time, it's worth walking around Barclay Heritage Square. There's a lot of rhododendrons, lots of garden kind of space, not formal like Bouchard or others, but definitely like local plants and gardens to sort of walk through.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I've got a hand, and it's Ruth. Ruth, please go ahead and unmute yourself. I'll just give Ruth a second here. I know sometimes.
Are there any pictures from inside the tower? Is that what it is?
Okay, finally had to do it 3 times before it would let me. Anyway, believe it or not, when I moved to the farm outside of the city of Wetaskiwin when I was 6, for the first, I don't know how many years, we had a wood coal stove in the kitchen. And on the right side, there was something called a reservoir, and you would put water in there and it would just naturally heat so that you always had access to warm water without having to clutter up the top of the stove. Does this stove have a reservoir?
You know what? I think it does, Ruth. Now that as you're saying that, I think I'm going to look again when I go back. But I think it does. Yeah.
It's amazing how practical some of these old gadgets were, you know, in terms of how functional and practical they were, given there was no electricity. The other question I wanted to ask you was, I must be thinking about trying to stay warm. The shelving above the fireplace in the parlor, is that right?
Yep.
What kinds of things were on those shelves? Were they knickknacks? Were they china, books? What pictures?
So I can only speak to what's on them now, because I'm not sure if the Roeddes had that exact same style of fireplace. But as I said, it was a fireplace from a home of a similar time period. So what we've got displayed on them now are both those things. We've got some books, we've got some vases, and I think there might be some figurines on there as well for the show. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Cindy. That was really interesting. Thank you.
So really great to be able to feel, again, I mean, we were talking about this kind of in the social chat before we started, which is, for me personally, there's so much history here. And even though the history is not thousands of years old, it's still history to our neighborhood in Vancouver. And I know absolutely nothing about it. So for me, I just enjoy hearing all the historical stuff around it. So I know Rita has her hand up. So Rita, we're going to come to you in just a second, but there is a question posted in the chat that Donna's going to read out for us. So I'll get Donna to do that first, and then we'll call on Rita.
Yes, I have a question here. Are there any pictures from inside the tower level?
So pictures showing, I think the short answer is for this presentation, no, but are you wondering about what it looked like up or what it looked like looking out? So let me try answering it this way. So if you go up the tower, it's a very steep set of stairs, and it's a very tiny space up there, but it does have window panes 360 degrees. And so when the Roeddes lived there, the view they would have had, even from the floor below, would have been of the North Shore Mountains, Stanley Park, English Bay. It would have been really, Lost Lagoon would have been a real beautiful view. The story was that because Mr. Rattenbury wouldn't give Mrs. Roedde a basement, he compensated and said, well, I'll give you this turret so that you can go and you know, have this beautiful view. Now, if you're a mom with 6 kids, I'm not really sure how much time you have to sort of climb up all these stairs and sit and look out the window. But that's kind of the story that we have.
That's super interesting. I'm wondering if, have you been up in that space before yourself, Cindy?
I have, yeah. It's a perk of being a volunteer.
Yeah, of course it is. But you were talking about it being a small space, and I'm wondering if you can compare that to something like, is it like being in a passenger seat of a car? Is it like being in a closet? How?
You know what? No, it'd be bigger than that. Maybe like, let me think. Maybe like the interior of a car, but taller. You know, like, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking width-wise, right, or circumference-wise. You know, if you come to the house, what I usually tell people is you climb this, you know, you come up to the 2nd floor, there's a landing. And on that landing, probably 4 people can stand comfortably pre-COVID, right? No distancing. Right. And it's about the same size as that.
Gotcha. Okay. And then just in terms of the view, it's a, I guess, a glass dome, right? So you probably would have a really good view of like a starry night sky too, maybe.
No, because actually the dome itself is not.
It's not glass.
About the materials, I'm not sure if it's metal or wood, but the top would be covered, but it would be around the side, right?
Gotcha.
Like the 360 around the side, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks for the clarification. Rita, go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Actually, I'm just wondering I'm wondering what they used for in terms of lighting. You said there were lamps, but I don't think Vancouver had gas lighting, right? So did they use oil lamps? What did they use? I know you said there was candles in the Christmas tree, but
yeah. So I could be wrong about this, Rita. My understanding was that they did have some gas lighting before the electricity came in, and actually, I'm pretty sure that's correct, because I think that there are still some fixtures in the kitchen that showed where those were. But sort of gas, and yes, definitely oil lamps. So there's a couple of places in the house now where there's like those kind of decorative, you know, the big globe on the bottom and the chimney at the top of oil lamps that they would have had. They would have used candle lights, certainly. And then once electricity came in, there is overhead lighting, hanging lights in the entryway and the parlor and the dining room, and then lamps throughout the other parts of the house.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Rita, for your question. Just looking to see if we have any other hands up. None at the moment. So right now, of course, we're in COVID, and you had mentioned at the top that the Roedde House is technically open. So what does that process look like if I wanted to go visit the Roedde House during COVID times?
Okay, so the difference now is that you would purchase your tickets online. So we have a website. If you go to the website, there's links to purchase the tickets online. And the purpose of that is so that you have so we can limit the numbers through the house at the time. Mm-hmm. And what I will say to you right now is just where we are right now is often the groups that come through are the only groups at the time. So you could end up having a little private tour, through your house, through the house yourself.
Right.
Instead of coming in the front door, you'll now come to the den, to the side of the house. The den also has our public washrooms that are there. So it's set up so that you would come in there, have a chance to sanitize your hands, and then you would move through the house in slightly different order. So you'd see everything, like nothing that's not normally closed off is closed off. So you'd be able to go through. But the difference, and you can still go completely into the rooms. The difference is we ask people not to touch anything, not to pick up artifacts or whatever. Yeah. And as I say, there are, we do have a tablet with an audio tour on it so that you can take that and have it if you want. And there's always a docent there to answer questions.
Right.
If you care to, yeah.
And have you been involved in any of you were talking about there being like weddings and like some events and stuff held. Were you ever a part of any of those? What did those look like at the Roedde House? Because again, it's really small in the interior. So I kind of have to stretch my imagination to think about a wedding being held at the Roedde House.
Is Sarah still on?
Oh yeah, Sarah's in the background. Is that a question for Sarah?
It might be. Like, so the short answer is I haven't. So the great thing about volunteering at Roedde House, if anyone is local and interested in doing that, is there's lots of different ways you can volunteer. Mm-hmm. So I have really just been more doing the tours, but there's lots of other opportunities with those things. And there's Sarah, I see.
Hi.
Take that question.
I myself, I haven't seen any weddings in person, but I've seen the images. And I think for what people usually do when they rent is they spend most of their time in the parlor.
Right.
So most of the reception, most of even the photography that we see is all in the parlor. I think one of the reasons is because of the sofa chairs, as well as the fact that there is a piano in there, which again, pre-COVID, people came in to play all the time. So yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I appreciate that. I imagine that people might also have set up tents maybe on the property and.
I'm not really sure about that. So typically what it is they would be very small weddings. And actually in that sense, it would be very good for COVID if it was truly just your bubble. Because also the other thing that we have at the house that's on hold right now is, I don't think I got a chance to mention this. That's the one of the things that's unusual about the parlor is its shape. It's octagonal. And there's a number of advantages to that, but one of them is it has a really good acoustic. Mm-hmm. And so we also, pre-COVID times, would do concerts in there, live jazz and classical concerts every couple of months. And what they do is set up chairs in the parlor and then set up, the people would be at the piano or whatever other instruments they played, and they would do that. In the summer, they would do jazz from the porch. So they'd set up people and people just could come by locally, bring your own lawn chair. And
oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Now I want to live in the West End.
Really cool stuff there, yeah.
Donna tells us we have another question in the chat. So Donna, I'll call on you.
Yes, the question is, was the house electrified when the family left?
I believe it was, yeah. So electricity reached that part of the city in I think about 1903, 1901, 1903, somewhere around there. So they would have had it, because again, whether it was Mr. Rattenbury or whether it was the Roeddes themselves or some combination, is they really seem to have thought ahead a bit to say, okay, well, there's no electricity now, but we've lived places where there was, and we'll know it's coming. So they would kind of like prepare for it. So I believe they did, yeah.
Awesome. My favorite part of this tour, to be honest with you, two things. One is I love the stove.
Yeah.
And I love the story about piece of canvas, the Rogers flower sack, as you will, because my grandmother, who again I've talked about before, she's 96 now, but she was born in 1924. So this is the time period that her and her family, 10 kids in the family kind of thing. They often tell stories of how they used to use flour sacks and bleach them and make clothing out of them. And so it kind of brings a reality back to my own soul of my grandmother's own story. So I love that. It makes me want to just be there and touch them, because my Rogers flower bags are made out of paper. They're not made out of canvas.
Exactly. Well, and a lot of the guests who come through the museum, that's what we hear from them. Oh, my grandmother had this in her house, or
yes,
my had that in their house, or we had a young woman come through from China, and we have like one of those washboards, the old washboards.
Mm-hmm.
And she's saying, my mom still uses that, back in China.
Wow.
So, yeah. So there's, the connections are there, and it's eye-opening to see what the changes have been over a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. We don't have any other questions at the moment, Cindy. So I'm going to bring in Donna, because we have a couple of raffles to take care of. Certainly we have this lovely Roedde House swag bag that is full of fun stuff, a bar of soap, a beautiful vanilla scented candle that's in a tea mug. The tote bag itself, let's be honest, who couldn't use another tote bag? And the Vancouver Rain scent soap. When I visit Roedde House, I'm going to buy myself one of those, because I have to know what Vancouver Rain smells like. And a mask, and of course a ticket to the AEBC fundraiser. So this is an online fundraiser. So let's bring Donna out to draw for prize number 1.
Well, actually, Amy, before we do that, we have one last question.
One last question appearing in the chat.
In the chat, yes.
All right.
Do we know if the family moved to a grand house?
So yes, they moved to, I believe they had a new house built. They moved to West Point Grey. So that's enough. If you live locally, that'll tell you everything. If you don't, it was again, a sort of a very prosperous, sort of up and coming neighborhood. So I don't think it was grand in terms of a mansion at all, but certainly again, a more prestigious neighborhood that they moved to. Yeah. And a more prestigious address, let's put it that way.
Great. Okay.
All right.
So Cindy, I'm going to ask for your help here. Yeah. I've got, in case Amy is wondering, I've got my East Van Panto bag.
Love the East Van Panto. Awesome.
Van Panto. All right. So Cindy, I am shaking up the names. So if at any time you could say stop, I will pick that name.
Okay. Stop.
All right. So the first draw goes to Yuko.
Yuko! Yay, Yuko! You won the swag. I was gonna call it the swag bag package from Roedde House, and 1 ticket to the online fundraiser for the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians. That fundraiser is happening on November 1st, by the way. So we'll be in contact with Yuko about how to get her that prize.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And the second prize, the second prize is a single ticket to the fundraiser happening on November 1st. So,
all right. And Cindy, whenever you're ready.
Stop.
It is John in Toronto.
John in Toronto. Yay, John. Awesome. John, we're going to make sure that you get your email ticket to the AEBC fundraiser. And maybe I'll see you online there, because I also have my ticket to the AEBC fundraiser. So that's awesome. That's our draw, friends. Thank you, Cindy, so much for joining us this afternoon, taking us through the Roedde House. I really enjoyed listening to all the history. I, in my mind, was thinking about how I continue to remember all of this stuff for the day when we get to play trivia again, because a lot of us in the blind community would gather for local trivia nights and such. And so now I have to remember all these details. But if people want to look up the Roedde House, how do we do that?
Oh, okay. I would say in terms of, so we have a website. So if you
that's all we need.
That's all you need. Yeah. And then it would give you links to other places, or Heritage Vancouver, that kind of thing.
So I guess the web link and some other links are going to be circulated to our friends after the fact in your post email survey about the event. And also don't forget that Roedde House has offered a bag of a cup of tea. So if you would like to receive your tea sample, please just let us know what your address is and we'll make sure that you get that in the mail. So that's super lovely. And it's been such a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you so much, Cindy, for joining us. Those folks who want to remain on the line for just a little informal chat for another 15 minutes or so are most welcome, or you're most welcome to enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon, whatever that looks like for you.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Cindy.